Well, foreign dignitaries, including heads of state and government, will attend President-elect Cyril Ramaphosa's inauguration ceremony tomorrow at the Union Buildings in Pretoria. Ramaphosa was elected as the president of the seventh administration by the National Assembly last week. Now, following his inauguration, the president is also expected to announce his inclusive cabinet after the ANC formed the government of national unity with other parties, including the Democratic Alliance, Inkatha Freedom Party, Patriotic Alliance, and the Good Party. To talk more on this, we are joined by Dr Oscar van Heerden. He's a Senior Research Fellow for African Diplomacy and International Relations at the University of Johannesburg. Dr van Heerden, a pleasure having you. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
Good morning, Leanne, and good morning to your viewers.
So we've been seeing foreign heads of states arriving here in South Africa, including SADC leaders, all of this ahead of the presidential inauguration ceremony. So perhaps we can begin by talking about the significance of this event as the country celebrates 30 years of democracy, and we've just come out of a very tense election with perhaps a surprise result, and now a government of national unity. Perhaps you want to just weigh in on this with some ideas.
No, absolutely, it is. Firstly, you're right, Leanne, it's about the 30 years, and everyone that knows about post-liberation organizations on the continent, but also further afield, Latin America, knows that 30 years is usually quite a milestone where things change, where liberation movements lose power, and so on. Many scholars were following this, and so it's quite fortuitous that indeed in this 30th year of celebration of our democracy, the ANC loses its parliamentary majority. So that in itself was significant. But I think of more significance was that the uncertainty that brought. We saw a very mature governing party, a very mature leadership that accepted the results, that indicated that the people have spoken, and decided to then invite other opposition parties into the government to form a government of national unity. And I think that in itself is quite significant. The ANC could, of course, have been arrogant, could have wanted to do a minority government, which would have come with all the complications of wanting to find consensus and agreement on decisions and so forth. I think the best option was indeed to try and invite everyone in. And as you know, Leanne, two significant opposition parties decided to stay on the outside and not be part of the GNU, which is MK and the EFF.
And certainly there are many things to be watching as all of this takes place, because international dignitaries, of course, are going to be here. And this could be a big sign as to whether they are in support of the country for embarking on this route and forming the government of national unity or not. So, I mean, if I just look at the list of some that are coming, and again, these are not proper confirmations. We will see really tomorrow who'll be here, but we've got the Seychelles Vice President, Namibia's President, Tanzania, South Sudan President, Eswatini, His Majesty, the Zimbabwean President, Mauritius, Cote d'Ivoire, Malawi, a foreign minister attending there, a China special envoy at the deputy president level, Mozambican president, Angolan, Burundi and Palestinian minister coming in to witness the swearing in. So let's perhaps look at those that have agreed to come, and it looks like a big thumbs up perhaps from who we are seeing, but this is particularly from the continent, and then of course Palestine also represented here.
You know, Leanne, what the viewers might not know is that this is actually quite a bumper year for elections in the world. I think there's something like 40 elections happening all over the world. In November, there will be the United States. On the 4th of July, it will be the United Kingdom, and many, many others. And so I say this because I just want to raise the alarm that there is fatigue. You know, all foreign governments will have to manage who they send to these various presidential inaugurations and so forth. But yes, a healthy amount of governments that have agreed to honor the occasion. Usually what happens is if the head of state can't make it for whatever reason, they would also sometimes ask their ambassador representative to represent the government. So I think from that we'll even get a more exhaustive list. But I do think, that people have keenly followed our path of democracy from the days of Mandela. I think lots of people had always had an expectation that the project would fail. And yet South Africa proves time and time again that we can face the adversaries, we can come together as a nation. And indeed, this GNU is representative of that. And I think a lot of governments are actually going to be supportive of this move. The big question, of course, on everyone's mind, both here at home and abroad, is will the GNU be able to stand the test of time?
Yeah, and that's what we need to see, because we've seen coalition governments working in many of our metros, municipalities, and within our provinces, and they've been shaky to say the least, with people being in and then out and out and in, and it's been very difficult to witness. And now we're going to see this at a national level, and one wonders how it's going to work. And I want to sort of bring, because it's the spotlight is being shone very much so on foreign policies and how the world is taking to us when we see this inauguration taking place. You see two parties, and let's just take, for instance, the DA and the ANC, that have very differing views on certain issues that are on a global scale, as well as a continental issue. How are they going to reach a middle ground here? And that I imagine is going to be a very, very tough point for them of contestation.
Yes, before I address that, Leanne, I do want to say that I've raised on a number of occasions and platforms my concern around coalitions. And as you rightfully point out, it hasn't worked, let's be honest. It has been a disaster, to say the least, in metros and some of the municipalities. On the very small municipalities, we can argue that it had worked, because it's smaller communities, there's much more, they stand to lose more. But it seems the bigger the budget, the more problems there are with coalitions, as we've seen in Johannesburg, Ekurhuleni, Tshwane, and elsewhere. And I do want to make the point that I think, at the beginning of our democracy, in the early 90s, there was an acknowledgement on the part of the private sector that blacks were perhaps not ready to govern, black South Africans, which was a reasonable assumption. I mean, we have not been in government, we don't know how parliament works, etc. And so the private sector decided to fund various fact-finding and training sessions and send these delegations overseas to Europe and elsewhere to go and learn about democracy, parliamentary democracy, constitutional democracy, and so forth. And I think a similar process is required nowadays with regards to coalitions, to just leave that point there. Now, on the international front, look, there's lots of policy divergence, dissonance between the ANC and the DA. We all are waiting with bated breath as how that is going to be managed. But that is the nature, and that is the new normal, Leanne. If you look at governments in Europe who form coalitions, they have to cajole, they have to lobby, they have to argue very vociferously sometimes, and at times agree to disagree in the interest of moving forward. So it's going to be a difficult one around Israel, around Ukraine and Russia. The fact that we are supposedly in bed, as some put it, with Russia and China and so forth. But I do think that at some point there's going to be, the parties would have to find convergence in saying, is this something that is so important to me that I'm prepared to break the coalition, that I'm prepared to put a halt to government? Or is it something that, though it is important to us, we must find some common ground? And common ground, for example, Leanne, with regards to Israel, could be as the path that Rise Mzansi took, for example, which is to say we both support a two-state solution. We both agree that countries cannot break international law in terms of humanitarian law, but also in terms of genocide and so forth. These are some of the fundamentals. As to how we respond to that is obviously where the disagreements are. Was it necessary to go to the ICJ and ICC? And these will be debatable points, but I do think in the interest of running a government day to day, I think both the ANC and the DA, as the two big parties, are going to have to put a few of their policy dissonance on the back burner.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a reality, because at the end of the day, I think what people have been hoping for and what the narrative has been is that we will put the country first. But that is still to be seen, because, you know, it's been quite a difficult one, because we were having a conversation in terms of we've never seen this agreement. We don't know what the agreement between these parties actually entails, and, you know, where they're going to be sitting on certain issues. We got a glimpse yesterday when Helen Zille spoke about the fact that as the DA, if there is something that's going to be a no confidence vote in the president for the Phala Phala issue, they will not vote with that, and they will now stick to certain guidelines, whereas before this was never the case. And, you know, one has to ask that question: how is something like this going to work, where you have got a massive opposition party now joining the party that it has been opposed to on so many levels, and yet we've got to make this work? And these are things we're going to see playing out live, aren't we, on a television channel that I think is going to be one of the most highly watched, that being the Parliamentary Channel.
No, absolutely. I mean, look, the truth of the matter is the DA, the PA, and others, they've made a bit of a meal of the Phala Phala thing. Quite honestly, I think it's a red herring, and the DA knows it, in the sense that institutions have sort of spoken on this matter, you know, whether it is SARS, the Revenue Service, whether it is the Reserve Bank, and whether it is the Public Protector. These are all, and indeed the Hawks, these are all institutions that have already pronounced on the Phala Phala issue. But of course, in the interest of posturing, in the interest of keeping things alive, putting the governing party under pressure, it makes sense to keep the matter high on the agenda and in the psyche of the ordinary people. But I think the DA is basically saying, look, now that we are in a government of national unity with the governing party, perhaps this red herring should again be put on the back burner, because actually we don't really have a case here except to question the ethical leadership of a person such as Cyril Ramaphosa. But, you know, I think you are absolutely right. This is going to be a fascinating 5 years, Leanne. Mm-hmm. I think people are going to be glued to the Parliamentary Channel, unfortunately for the SABC. But yeah, we will all have to wait with bated breath to see how they navigate some of these contradictions.
Yeah, they certainly will. Well, we're getting wind that the Burundi Prime Minister's also just arrived in South Africa. So it's all happening. It's happening now as we speak, that the world is focusing in on what is happening here in South Africa. Dr. Oscar van Heerden, thank you. Thanks for talking to us. He, of course, is a senior research fellow for African diplomacy and international relations at the University of Johannesburg. So, presidential inauguration taking place tomorrow, and lots of members from around the world, dignitaries from around the world, touching down in the country to witness this momentous occasion. All right, let's take a break. We'll see you with the news at 8 after this.